Steam Scara Irkab is probably the most easy, recognizable, staple 4-off card for a deck like Gear Chronicle. Yet, we slowly see it being replaced and moved out of decks, as with the latest results, we see less and less of Irkabs in competitive builds. So, what is actually happening here? And the best person to answer that question is of course the Gear Chronicle master himself. So, let's get into it. Stand up! Vanguard! Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another discussion video, and today we have a very interesting topic which also strikes very close to home, as today we're talking about one of the most strongest and recognizable staple cards for Gear Chronicle, which is Steam Scara Irkab. Ever since this card was released in the Astral Force, we immediately knew that this is gonna be a staple card for Gear Chronicle, as it's such a solid, strong card which will always give you value. But what's currently happening is that we see this card slowly being replaced by cards like Stroboscope Dragon, as well as other spot removals and even some other very interesting grade tools that allow us to get some more consistent value. So what is actually happening here, and why is this card, which we all thought is an obvious 4-off in every Gear Chronicle deck, is being replaced? Well, to answer that question, we actually need to go back to the Astral Force where this card was introduced to have a better understanding what the actual value is of Steam Scara Irkab and why it's slowly being replaced by cards like Stroboscope Dragon. So once the Astral Force was revealed and dropped, we've got this new deck with Chronofang and Chronofang Tiger Rebellion that was all about lowering the hand size, beating with a lot of oppression, and then building that hand size back up at the end of your turn so you can still defend against your opponent's onslaught. And a card like Steam Scara Irkab lies at the center of this, as it's such a good card to facilitate this playstyle, as you discard a card in your main phase, so you're lowering your hand size, and once your Vanguard attacks, so basically at the end of your turn, you draw that card back in the form of an added drive check. An extra drive check on your Vanguard is always seen as a very solid skill, as it's basically a Blaster Dark that works on every single turn, and Blaster Dark was already regarded as a pretty good aggressive card. Steam Scara Irkab, basically the same, but could also work in a late game. So immediately saw a lot of competitive play and also play around the board because it was such a good card. And the icing on top of this card was that it could also be discarded as a grade 3, so it helped with your consistency engine in Gear Chronicle. So a card that gives you a drive check, so always added pressure on every single turn from turn 2 and onwards, and it can substitute as a grade 3 discard fodder, so it increases the consistency of Gear Chronicle's main mechanic. Sounds like an amazing card that would always see play. And you should say yes, but there's one underlying issue with Irkab, which actually doesn't make it such a clear-cut answer as a 4-off staple card for every strategy in Gear Chronicle. And that is with the fact that an added drive check doesn't really mean anything if you need to discard a card, as well as that it costs something like a counterblast. Let's take a look at the discard itself. Because we need to discard a card and we then get it back in the form of a drive check, means this card isn't actually adding you any value in card economy wise, because you discard and you get one. The only way that you can get bonus value out of this is that you hit a draw trigger, but the chance of that actually applying to that added drive check is very slim, and you shouldn't add that to the equation of the value of this particular skill. So that means this card in itself doesn't provide you with extra advantage besides the potential pressure against your opponent that they might waste more guard against the added drive check of your Vanguard attack, or that you maybe hit an additional trigger and you can pass that power and critical or something else onto your rear guards. So it's a potential of something that you could get out of it, but that's not always the case. Now, the other negative point about this card, what works against Irkab, is the fact that this card costs a counterblast. Because it costs a counterblast means it will conflict with probably one of the most powerful skills the clan will get access to. The moment this card was released, there wasn't actually anything that competed with it, because the only card in Gear Chronicle that costed Counterblast was the Counterblast 2 skill of Lost Legend, which arguably was a laughable skill. So that's why we didn't thought a second thing once we saw the Counterblast attached to the skill, especially in Chronofang, because you're gonna throw down all your Counterblasts anyway, so you might as well use it for something else. But with the release of Chronojet Dragon, we slowly are seeing skills that will cause counterblast, which we actually want to use. And this will become an issue the more and more sets we go into more support for Gear Chronicle, as most likely the most powerful skills will be with counterblast. So that is a very limited factor of Steam Scara Irkab, which will work against the card itself. So basically, to summarize, Steam Scara Irkab itself doesn't really give actual value. It's basically phantom and potential value. You only get something if you actually hit a trigger, or if your opponent is forced in a really awkward spot that they need to overguard because of the potential extra drive check. But on flat surface, this card doesn't actually give you any value because you just drop and draw for card advantage. And the fact that the cost counterblast might work against other engines. Now, fast forward and we go to Chronojet set, the next stage extra boosted set, and we get to the predicament where we have a card like Chronojet that actually is competing on the counterblast cost with Irkab. But there is another problem here, and that's the fact that the extra drive check actually doesn't give a lot of value to next stage and Chronojet's multi-tech strategy, because the extra drive check just is only for next stage and not for Chronojet, and actually you want to have Chronojet with the multiple drive check as it comes with the guard restrict ability. Giving next stage another drive check doesn't really mean anything as they can just perfect guard against the attack. But even in that case, you still get value out of the drive check and you can still get value. And because Chronojet is arguably the only card that uses counterblast, you can still make the argument there is room to actually play this card. And even I made the same assumption because I used Irkab in my deck spotlight for next stage. The card isn't bad, it's still a really good card, but then you can still ask the question, why are players removing Irkab from the deck? Well, this is mainly a meta call and not actually a deck engine call. And what I mean with the difference is basically you can build a deck to work on its best capability on its own. So make the best engine for your boss monster. So the best deck that works with next stage or with Fang, something like that. Or you can make the best deck that works against the meta, so you can counterplay certain strategies. And the reason why they're removing Irkab from their list is mainly a meta call. Because after the next stage, once we start going into the main set and we enter Silver Dust Blaze, we're going to see decks that have really important rearguard units that basically push their whole offensive, that fuel their whole onslaught of combos and card economies and all that kinds of stuff. And because they are more rearguard reliant, means any deck or any strategy that has a way to remove those cards can actually get a way more advantage than just giving a potential extra drive checks. And this is the reason why we see Irkab being replaced for Stroboscope Dragon. And to give a good example against which decks this actually works really good, well, basically the top two dogs of Silver Dust Blaze, Overlord the Cross and Messiahs for Link Joker. Overlord the Cross has a lot of good rearguards, like the Grade 1 Restander that allows your Vanguard to keep getting boosted, or they have the Grade 2 Searcher, which can also gain a lot of power for every time your Vanguard attacks. So if you could remove those two cards from the fields on a consistent basis, that will probably give you way more value than just giving another drive check on your Vanguard, which probably will not even amount to any extra advantage. And against Messiah, they have their main Grade 4 aggressive unit that they want to have on the field before they start doing their turns. So if you can remove that, then that is a lot of advantage that you remove from your opponent's control. And they also have a lot of other control options or a lot of other multi-tech key pieces that if you could remove them, will definitely set them back a couple of turns before they can actually do their main combo plays. And yes, Messiahs can recall from the drop zone, but don't forget, they need to call them locked, so they don't actually get multi-tech potential from those cards once they are placed as locked units. And there are many other examples where getting retire skills in your deck can actually give you more advantage than just a blind potential drive check. And this is also the reason why not only Stroboscope Dragon is added to the deck, but we also see some Mazer gears popping up here and there, left and right, that maybe at the one of or two of, that basically give you more options to a potential field snipe if you need one. Now, of course, Stroboscope Dragon isn't the only card that is replacing Irkab. We also also have the grade 2 promo card that only Japan got, maybe we will get, that is mono module dragon, which basically allows you to have a really good rearguard beater that can combine with next stage always be a 20k beater, or potentially 25 if you ride grade 3 that turn as well. And being able to counter +1 to get a crit, you can say you emulate a critical trigger plus an extra 5k in the right circumstances. So actually that gives you guaranteed value instead of Irkab that gives you potential value. So the reason why we see Irkab slowly being removed out of the deck isn't mainly because the card itself is bad. On the contrary, this is an insanely powerful card that will always be a possible pick for whatever strategy you want to apply, because giving an extra drive check to your Vanguard is always really good because your opponent needs to PG that attack, or they need to waste a lot of guards or take the gamble that you might double crit or triple crit them on that particular attack. But it is moved out of the deck mainly because the meta is demanding for it. As decks become more and more rearguard reliant, then at the same time, being able to control those rearguards becomes all the more valuable than just being pure aggressive. Because yes, you can be aggressive, but if you cannot kill your opponent and they have their entire pieces on the board, no matter how many cards you have in hand, you probably will still lose that particular turn. So if you can mitigate the amount of value they have on the board and still apply a bit of pressure, then that might actually be the golden ticket for winning most of your matches. Before I want to end this video, there is one interesting thing that applies because we have an Irkab clone that comes out in Silver Dust Blaze, and I will talk more in depth about this card when I go over the set review for Oracle Think Tank. Because we have the grade 2 Diviner Kuro Kazuchi that is emulating Irkab. So you can ask yourself, does this card have the same issues that Irkab will face because it's a very similar card? In my honest opinion, this grade 2 for Oracle Think Tank is actually a lot better than Irkab for many reasons. One of those reasons is it costs a Soul Blast. So that in itself will mean it will probably conflict less with other cards that are very powerful that will rely on Counter Blast. So it's probably a more flexible card. On the other thing, this card immediately gets you the card back. So it's actually a cycle on demand. So if you want to fix your hand and use it for more offensive plays, you can do that with this grade 2. So you have more control of what's happening. But on top of that, this card will always get value, as you will always get 6k power and potentially get 10k power and a trigger effect. So that in itself already shows you that this card will always get value. Irkab doesn't get value on its own because you can potentially get a trigger, and if you do not, you basically did nothing for it. This card actually gives you always value because at the very least, it's a Soul Blast for a cycle and a +6. So that's way more value. But on top of that, this card synergizes with some very strong cards like the new Ichikishima as well as the Goddess of the Sun Amaterasu, so you get even more value off of those skills. So just like Irkab, it works with a specific engine that makes the card better. Irkab is a lot better with Chrono Fang because you get more value out of how that card interact with Chrono Fang. Same as with this grade 2. However, I think this is a better interaction because this can be an engine that can be splashed in any other strategy, unlike Irkab with Chrono Fang that is less of an engine and more of a main strategy or a finisher. But on top of that, which makes this grade 2 for Oracle Think Tank even better in my opinion, is the fact that it's in Oracle Think Tank. Oracle Think Tank can manipulate the top cards of their deck, and if not even their entire deck, so you have way more control and say in the matter of if you're going to hit a trigger or not, so you can actually force out the value that you want for this grade 2. So that's why I think a lot of people are actually overlooking this particular card, which is, in my honest opinion, an upgraded form of Irkab in all its glory. And that basically wraps up this discussion, and you now understand what is happening within the deck builds for Gear Chronicle. And it's always interesting to see this change in deck builds while the meta is evolving, because a meta is almost never still unless it's very easy to solve which are the best decks. But with the rapid releases that we have in Vanguard, the chance of that actually happening is very slim unless a couple sets back to back are meta divining and we get a meta that stays the same, which we had in the VBT4 era, or I mean VBT6 with Phantasmal Steed Restoration, where the AL4 decks were basically dominant for a couple of months. But currently we see more changes and more shifts where we see more interesting deck builds that are evolving, like we see with Gear Chronicle that went from Chrono Fang into Chrono Jet, and then from Chrono Jet we go to a more controlled version of Chrono Jet, and it will evolve even more once the Japanese players get their hands on this new promo that allows Gear Chronicle to multi-attack. But with that said, I want to thank my patrons over at patreon.com/Vanguard Insider for making this video possible. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel, you can simply do that by going down on this video and hitting the subscribe as well as the bell button to be updated for future videos. And if you want to help us a little bit more directly, you can do that by going over to patreon.com/Vanguard Insider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one.